it too. So here we are. So I don't even know how to do a comprehensive resume for myself, honestly, but I did have a coffee and coke the other day with a potential constituent, potential voter for me, letting me know that they would really like, after digging a little bit on me, they'd really like to hear more upfront about my business background and the fact that I have been operations manager or COO or C-level in multiple companies. So I thought maybe I'd add on that. Yeah, I don't know. I've been been a business consultant and essentially branding and marketing and how to do business when the systems are not really set up for you and you had to create something that didn't exist already. So figuring that out, essentially compliance and how to navigate bureaucracy and red tape. And I know that's a big thing, especially for people that are interested in urbanism, about we have all of these potential solutions to what's going on in our community right now, but most of the issue is that the institutions that govern our ability to change the structures of our communities make it almost impossible to make those changes. So that's what actually got me interested in urbanism in the first place. Before I even knew what urbanism was, it was a question of, well, why don't we have these things? And why isn't it like this everywhere? And the answers happen to be stacks and stacks of papers that I don't actually have the aptitude to digest, but found some folks that do, and now call them good friends. So thank you for having me, and I'd love to talk to you about like whatever, not just urbanism, if you want to give me any type of break, because I've had a really long week.
Totally, yeah. This definitely doesn't have to be this can be a casual conversation. I will ask one question about urbanism before we can move on to other things. And by the way, everyone, we are recording this chat for to put on the website, and just so you know, it'll probably just be Sherae and myself on the video, but just so you know, you can always turn off your video if you're uncomfortable with that. And I want to ask about urbanism because I'm curious what it means to you and how, in general, the movement can sort of connect outside of its bubble. Obviously, the criticism you hear a lot of urbanism is that, it's too wide, it's too technocratic, it's too, just out of touch. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
So when you ask that question, I unfortunately sometimes forget that I'm a candidate for office and not a consultant anymore. Well, not anymore, but like not currently as my full-time thing. But that would be a consulting question.
Yeah, totally.
Making something more accessible and making it more diverse, essentially, is what you're asking me. You're right. Urbanism under that title has been extremely white, which is probably why that title never really appealed to me until I met some folks who actually spent the time to explain. And I think that's what everyone needs, is someone that's willing to actually slow down and talk to them and explain and make the equivalencies in what they do already understand or what their aptitude is already for what they need in their neighborhood or their city to thrive, and being able to do the equivalencies when it comes to jargon, because the language is extremely inaccessible. The systems that you're referring to when it comes to institutions, all the way from architecture to design to development to zoning, it's not accessible in a way it wasn't even meant to be for folks that aren't in those professions in the first place. So, I mean, the reason that, architecture is a profession is, one, because your work could end up hurting or helping people, or like quite literally killing someone. And then also they can charge more for the piece of paper. That's a joke. But the point being is, the reason it's a profession is because there is a right way and a wrong way to do it, and the wrong way could lead to people's death. So when you think about who still has access to the professions around like urban planning and land use law and architecture, design, etc., for the most part, the folks that have access to are the folks that had the privilege of resources to be able to pursue that work path and that education. So I think it really does come down to the fact that the entire system from the bottom up is inaccessible, and it's been primarily managed by government entities, not by individuals or communities themselves. And that's the bridge that we have to fill with organizations like yours. So first and foremost, if you come everything from if you had no knowledge of the situation, but just had to live your day-to-day life under resourced economically, and what you would notice and how you would relate to that with the language that you would use, or with how it directly impacts your health and safety and well-being, and the livability of a space, and start there. And the flow chart to the jargon, especially, that will allow people to see the beauty of urbanism and the beauty of why people working for livable spaces, even if they have higher economic privilege and can remove themselves from those situations, is actually a bottom-up approach to changing our society. That would be my recommendation.
Totally. Thank you for that. And just a quick follow-up on that. One thing that we wrote about in our endorsement and that impressed us from your interview was we got talking about bodegas and that kind of style of urbanism that's sort of accessible and very sort of neighborhood based and just sort of like helps foster community. So without stepping on your comment a little bit too much, but kind of how did you arrive at that kind of urbanist kind of vision? And I think you, if I remember correctly, is from having lived in Brooklyn for a bit or visiting.
My mom and like the majority of my family that from the previous generations are from New York. So when I was a teen and I was dead set on going to Columbia, we road tripped across the country. And I was like, I knew I was supposed to be here. It didn't happen. I'm here, obviously, in Seattle, but I knew from the time I was 13, 12, that that's where I wanted to be. From everyone that I knew from there, the opportunity that was there, the diversity is there, the extracurricular activities that are available, the fact that the city never sleeps, so it makes it so you can still have like a kind of work-life balance that you don't really see in more rural areas. And access to education and museums was a huge deal for me as well. So I kind of got off path when I didn't end up going to school over there, and still wanted to make it to a bigger city. And when I made the decision to move to Seattle, I came over here on a train and checked out different houses in different neighborhoods. And other than Capitol Hill, the U District was the only part of Seattle that actually felt like that. Felt busy, felt, there was variety, and everything was walkable. Like I knew I wanted to live in this like 10-block zone because then I could walk to Trader Joe's, walk to Safeway, walk to UW if I had to, walk to a clinic if I needed to go to the doctor. And it was the second largest bus hub in the entirety of the city. So there was no way I was going to be able to afford to live, Pike Pine Corridor, where that is the center of transit. So the closest thing happened to be walking distance from the university. And that's because it's, a feeder school that people live all the way, out to cities and still come all the way into U District to go to UW because it's an amazing school. And I thought, I might not be a student, but these are all the things that I need as a non-driver and someone that's like kind of restarting my life in another city where I don't know many people. I need access to that transit hub and to be able to walk everywhere else so I can afford to live here. So the U District, by default, with those parameters and requirements for myself, I fell in love.
Totally. And to me, that's pretty cool because you were thinking like an urbanist maybe before you even thought of yourself as an urbanist. And partially that was just thinking beyond cars.
Well, I was thinking beyond,
Yeah.
I was thinking within my ability. And there was,
Yeah.
I never had a driver's license. So I've never been, a driver. I've always been on transit. And I moved here from Spokane and like around Spokane, rural Washington. But Spokane was the closest city and I was dependent on buses and I knew how to get everywhere based on where the buses went. And so I didn't think that I would be able to handle moving to a city that didn't have mass transit, and I wanted to make it as easy as possible for myself to be comfortable here.
Totally. Um, and you think that's changed in the last 10 years as far as, stop feeling like so many of our neighborhoods are sleepy? Maybe now it's a bad example because I feel like it's super hard to get food after 8 p.m. right now, but with COVID, but do you feel like that's sort of changing a little bit?
Yeah, I know it has. There's actually a lot of families that had restaurants here in the U District that I became close with because I was a frequent customer, and so was other people. So were other people in my house. We would go in and probably bombard them a little bit with meals for 12 to 13 people because we all lived together because we had to, and we they got to know us. They got to know our orders. They got priced out, especially when their new developments came in and some of the upzoning came in, and they were told they were going to be able to come back, and they weren't able to survive the hiatus. And they had to, completely extricate themselves from the neighborhood, not just, oh, we don't have a business location in the U District anymore. Our whole family can't afford to live here anymore after our business shuttered, and that's heartbreaking. And I know specifically with transit, there used to be a pretty frequent express bus 1 block from my house to get downtown, which is where I've worked about half of my time here in Seattle. And that's not really available as much anymore. And it goes to now the link, but that's not really feasible for all the places along the way, even as an express that someone might need to go for services. So that's been really hard on me, is having to go further and have multiple, out of the way stops and transfers. So I can't get a lot of my errands done in transit anymore with having like stop here and get back on that bus to stop here. And it's been a uncomfortable adjustment over the last few years.
That makes you think you have a pretty aggressive vision for what the state should do with transit, and part of that's within your climate kind of vision. And one of the things you mentioned in your platform is either lowering fares or making transit free, which the state would, I guess, would sort of help out with that by funding some of that so these agencies can afford it. But do you want to talk a little bit more about that and what you think that would mean for folks who, are maybe looking at the buses right now and going, oh, this is getting worse right now, partially because of COVID, but just not the funding not being there.
Yeah, so it does come down to funding in the long run, but when it comes down to where we decided to put the platform pieces for wanting to expand transit, it was really difficult. And like, honestly, we waffled around it a lot personally because, I probably said it before in earshot of you, or you've read it, but intersectional policy analysis and policy, production, creating policy is kind of one of the things that's missing the most from such a, dense area like the 43rd. There are so many interests and there are so many individual needs. And we really need to be not just passing policy because there's pressure from one place. We need to be looking at how this affects everybody else that may not have the privilege or the resources to advocate for their own needs and like fight policy when the system really works pretty fast and sessions only a couple of months, and it's a lot, but we end up, doing unnecessary and unintentional harm. And so with transit being under climate, that's the one people understand. It's more universal to understand that climate is a necessity and it affects all of us and it's pretty visible. But honestly, I really wanted to put it under, racial justice and disability justice, because not having access to be able to move throughout your city or area or go meet your own needs to get to where you need to go, it severely inhibits your ability to grow and thrive and do more than just survive, especially in a city that's changing so quickly like Seattle. So it's so much more than what it can do to the climate. But the reason we don't have mass transit throughout the entire Puget Sound area that's affordable and accessible and prevalent is, partially because the system that we are under is created by folks who want to contribute to the power building of capital and capitalists. And they don't think about every time we push people out of the city further and further that we need to simultaneously be making, significant investments in being able to bring them back into the core of the economy. And that hurts to think about, that we literally traded our bus system and our transit system while we simultaneously are saying it's okay for you to be moved out of your, home city. And it's a lot to swallow simultaneously. It's also really hard to swallow that the majority of the electeds that talk about transit and they talk about mobility and they talk about buses and trains only look at it from a climate standpoint. So it doesn't surprise me that they're the same people that haven't done anything to change our regressive tax system, because that's the basis of why we have so much economic inequity in the city and the state. So yeah, passing sweeping progressive taxation is a necessity, not just for climate, so we can have mass transit, but for racial equity and disability justice, food security, healthcare, everything. And that needs to start with us, actually looking at our Constitution and educating the entirety of Washington on what type of constitutional changes need to happen for an income tax to even be possible. And then doing what we can to look at sales tax and how it's disproportionately impacting people that are already, economically under-resourced. Capital gains tax seems to be the one that's the hot topic this year that everyone can seem to agree upon, but somehow we haven't done it yet. So that should be that should be an easy one this year, and I'm really excited to be part of it. But the one we don't really want to delve into, and very few people have even really looked into the specifics of how to do it, would be a wealth tax. I can't say I know every detail in every letter. Would probably be a 20+ page bill, but I can say we shouldn't have not looked into it sooner. And no one can call themselves a progressive that hasn't even tried.
Totally, yeah. Seems like a few presidential candidates, maybe was it Warren, sort of brought it up, but yeah, it's sort of something that was, very quickly that people don't want to talk about that anymore. So I'm glad you bring it up, like that progressive tax reform is a lot of things, and it's a lot of ways to keep this wealth inequality that keeps getting wider and wider from doing that and that's going to strike some people as, I don't know, aggressive or un-American almost. But at the same time, the income tax has been a lot higher than it is now for a lot of years. And, certainly we can start going the other direction. Got a couple questions. Where to go next? We had a question that came in before the event that someone wanted to hear more about the Green Light Project, which was a project that you spearheaded. It's a harm reduction model, but I will leave more of the details to you. But they're curious to hear more about how that worked and went.
That's a really hard one for me to answer. I mean, some of the information is not mine to share. How it happened is because there was a vacuum of service that allowed folks to receive what they needed in order to be safer. But there really wasn't a will without conditions and extreme barriers from any of the organizations that served the North Aurora corridor. Even the folks that claimed to really want to help weren't able to muster the will or resources or create any type of sustainable organizing model to make it happen. And I'll be honest, I basically just kind of lost my energy for hearing the excuses. So I looked into what I needed to do to make it happen, and I did it. And I was lucky enough to have a lot of other people in the community that felt the same way I did and were itching to do something and could have, probably vibrated out of their own skins with how frustrating it is to hear that there's no help for people that uh, aren't aren't really seen as part of polite society. This is me paraphrasing very nicely what some other folks have said about, um, to paraphrase something that someone said that could have changed things. Well, they don't really want help because they wouldn't have chose the life they have. And I think that's one of the most hurtful things I've ever heard, because I'm 100% interchangeable with anyone that might be working outside. And I cannot imagine overhearing that myself while I was in their situation, and what I would have thought about this person that claims to want to help and claims to represent me, saying that I wasn't worth it. So it was, a lot of anger and hurt feelings, with very little resources, not willing to drop the willpower needed and the hours it took and the money it took to make it happen. But essentially, we do harm reduction, and maybe not the most traditional one that you might know of, which is just, clean drug use supplies. But we do the gambit. So access to food, access to hygiene, access to safe use supplies, access to safe sex supplies, access to security devices, pepper spray, etc. Whatever someone might need to stay as safe as possible, while they're either living or working outside in North Seattle, where we have pretty heavy policing that doesn't really have too much regard for why someone might be in their circumstances, cares more about how many calls we get about what they would consider quote unquote eyesores, which is pretty prevalent throughout this city. So we stepped in to try to provide as much support as we can to folks that are getting it from every direction. And we don't even decide for them what we do. They tell us what they need and we do our best.
Totally. Thank you for explaining that. And I know that part of what's been a challenge for you as a candidate is that you're doing all this really important work, and you're committed to COVID relief and drug mutual aid, and you're doing that at the same time as you're also trying to campaign. So I'm sure that's been just really challenging, being pulled in different directions like that. So
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
So the biggest hurdle has really been folks really wanting to have detailed conversations about the work and about, individual participants' experiences and the specifics of what we do on a daily basis. And it's not my place to comment on other people's lives and where they're at. And it's been a struggle every day to very politely decline a lot of specific questions, because it's not mine to share. But I'm, watching so many other candidates across the country, name drop someone and tell their story as a way to, like, I don't know, meet with people and get them interested in what they have to say, or use someone else's story of hardship to reach, voters that have never been in a situation like that, but think that you understand it a little bit more and would be a good choice to represent them. And I'm actually in a situation where I've been in those exact situations, which is why I, created the organizations I have. But for some reason, because I've been in those situations, I can't possibly be an authority on the solutions. And that's been very confusing to me. So I just wanted to kind of say specifically, like, thank you for asking about Greenlight, but it's not my place to talk about the specifics of Greenlight and what we see on a daily basis, because those aren't my stories to tell, especially for my own benefit.
And is that part about sort of building the trust that you need to sort of even get into communities like that are probably,
I would say that, but honestly, it's because I wouldn't want that to happen to me when I was there.
Yeah. Totally. Another question, sort of related, and I totally get why you don't want to get into the details on the Greenlight project, is the Housing First model, sort of another harm reduction model, and it's something you've endorsed in your platform. And we got a question coming in. and how would that housing first model serve people experiencing homelessness in Seattle better than other models,
That's great. Okay. We don't know.
Yeah.
So technically, I don't know. However, I know what it was like for me when I was homeless, and I was trying to also fight, with, my mental illness and my, eating disorder, my health issues, all those things at the same time, but without having like a roof over my head or a safe place to sleep and being up, all hours of the night, being cold, being, worried that I'm not gonna be able to find my next meal. That's not gonna make me, more ill. Those things. You can't really tackle anything in your life if you can't get decent sleep, you can't get warm, and you can't stay dry. And but please, anyone listening, watching, if you did it, I would love to hear about it. I couldn't. And I don't expect anyone else to be able to figure out your entire life and every problem, every barrier you have without a place to sleep that's safe. So what I will say is everything else we've ever tried hasn't alleviated the issue, which is ironically cultural. We have an issue with people being outside more because of how it makes us feel, seeing it when we're not in that circumstance or have never been in that circumstance, than we actually have with people living outside. That's very concerning. And it happens to be more about the visibility of hardship and the visibility of people in different circumstances, or the visibility of, behavioral health issues, than it is about the fact that we don't have enough people in homes. So I think a lot of this comes from education and being able to be okay if folks do decide to not seek the assistance that is here right now, because it's not good enough and it's pretty high barrier. But we need to create the will in the people who do care from a visceral point and who do care from lived experience, and empower them and resource them to be able to fight for models that work or work for them. We don't ever really go that direction on large scale, and we really need to. We have a bunch of great nonprofits that are doing things based on, individual lived experience, but we don't really give anyone enough power and resources in our, governing institutes to implement these on the mass scale. And that's literally the next step, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle is considered one of the pioneers of housing first model, and we only did that in a few locations, and it's just not been taken to scale. And even though the results are really good compared to other methods, and in case you weren't, for folks who are still kind of getting up to speed, housing first means giving someone housing without conditions, because so much of the housing for assistance that people can get, it's, are you, can you pass a drug test? Can you, can you get rid of your pet? Can you get rid of your partner? Because we don't allow partners in our shelter. It's a lot of things that people, if they actually thought about, would you be one to do that to get a house? Like sometimes it's a no, like just to give up your pet. But, to get a roof over your head, that's a tough choice, and we're forcing people to put themselves in. But how that kind of translates to policy in Olympia, there have been a lot of bills that are related to homelessness. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about one of the kind of big ones of last session. It actually didn't end up making it across the finish line, but who would be your seatmate, Nicole Macri, had a bill that was authorizing King County to pass a payroll tax. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason it didn't pass was because the business community wanted a stipulation that Seattle then couldn't pass its own payroll tax. And then between a combination of factors that just kind of fizzled out. But how do you think about that bill, and generally like getting support, more funding for housing first type interventions and all the other kinds of affordable housing interventions?
I do feel like it's a good start. I mean, I think there was so much concern around the sunset and the, stipulations on getting it passed or letting it through. What was really concerning was really how it happened, but it was like the most transparent way that we see, big businesses essentially bully representatives that are doing the will of their constituency. It was the most transparent one I've ever, I think, witnessed in my time here.
Mhm.
But what I would say is, I think it's a good start, but it's nowhere near enough. Like we've estimated over the last couple of years, multiple times, just in city council alone, that we would need, minimum of like $50 million a year for, 10 years to actually keep up with the rising issues with people that are unhoused and actually build the affordable housing or the free housing to do it. But I think the biggest issue more than anything has been that we are stuck at the whims of developers and landowners instead of using the land that we already have. So first and foremost, I don't think we would need quite as much money, even though we need a lot of money for all the other programs as well, if we were immediately jumping on using the land we already have for housing versus trying to sell off land all the time to make up for shortfalls in our general funds in our budgets. Which will significantly lower how much money we will need in order to actually implement a housing first model and build more affordable and free housing, public housing for individuals in Seattle. I want to try again, but I want to double down and try again. Like I think there's will for what Rep Mockery put up last year. This year, I'm pretty sure it would pass with flying colors this year. And then everyone would be like, we did it, good job. And I don't think it's enough anymore.
Mhm.
Last year, it would have been a great start, but it wouldn't have even really taken effect yet until about now and actually seeing the differences of what it could do. Because that money wouldn't have been able to be reallocated after being collected. So here we are. So I would say, yes, absolutely. We need to try it again. It was a great start. We should never be bending to the will of corporations in order to create limitations for our local governing bodies to make decisions in the pursuit of safety and health for constituents. I don't think that the state house should limit any municipality in being able to take care of its own people and to tax its own people. That doesn't make any sense to me. Just like we have people as representatives here in Seattle at the state house using Eastern Washington folks as excuses as to why they don't do what they need to for us. And that kind of just has to stop. The municipalist movement, movement I'm part of as a collectivist for the Seattle People's Party, we know what's best for us because we live here. That's it. You wouldn't want someone from Seattle telling you what to do in, Walla Walla. So why should the state be telling us in Seattle that we can't move as dynamically as we are as a city growing in our tax code or in how we allocate our money or how we spend it?
We have another question, and sorry if we keep asking you for advice like this, but it totally feels like such an important moment, and we'd love to have your wisdom. And how do we talk to family and friends who can't understand how or why we would defund police to create a system focused on community based accountability and safety? How do we help them understand the harm our traditional models of policing inflict, especially on BIPOC communities, particularly if they live in rural places and never interact with law enforcement?
That's a great question. I'm almost tempted to have my mom get on camera right now and explain how I explained it to her and my dad.
That's a good
I'm
answer.
not joking. I've considered it, but I can't really exploit my mother, tokenize her from her, current, homestead in Eastern Washington, Palouse area. But you're not gonna like my answer. I've spent 14 years of my life plus educating my family from rural Washington. I don't know if you have the spoons for it. I didn't, but I didn't really have a choice if I wanted to stay part of my family and have them really understand and see where I'm coming from, and see what's happened to me, and like really put it into context as to why any interaction with law enforcement has been damaging for me. It takes a long time to realize it when it's not your experience. Doesn't mean I'm still not, hurt that it takes you a really long time sometimes to understand why. But when it comes specifically down to defunding, police departments, I get why people are up in arms about the word defund and how they think it's an overnight striking of 100% of their budget, and all of a sudden we're going to wake up and all the cops are going to be unemployed. And that's just not what's happening. It's quite literally a matter of, why do we continue to increase the power? Because for some reason, money is power. Why do we choose to keep increasing the power of a department?
Totally. Yeah, I think it's this summer of protests and backlash from police and crackdowns. I think that's really, it's been an eye opener for a lot of folks who didn't have that experience, and I would include myself in that. So I'm really grateful for, the people who are in the street and the people who are educating. We may have lost Sherae there. We'll see if she's able to hop back on. Let's see. We have a couple more questions we get to, but we have about 15 more minutes left in our allotted time. Can you hear us, Sherae? Comcast strikes again. I don't know what our internet provider is, but I'll blame Comcast. Ray says public broadband for all. That's always what my mind goes to. It seems like, that you having to do so many Zoom calls, you realize there's pretty spotty internet in a lot of places in this city. And I feel like we pay enough for internet. It should be better. Folks can feel free to unmute for now while we wait for Sherae to get connected again, and we can kind of digest what we've heard so far. I am emailing them as we speak.
Do you have any idea how many of our representatives are carless? I feel like it's probably pretty few.
Yeah, it's not very many. We used to ask that, or we have asked that. Part of the problem is that there's not great transit to Olympia.
Yeah.
And
Right.
some have figured out how to kind of carpool, or there's all sorts of different arrangements. Some people like share an apartment in Olympia, I think, or find someone to like rent a room from, or stay with while they're in session, because while they're in session, they're super busy, but then session only lasts, a handful of months of the year. So then they usually move back to district. So it's sort of, you kind of live half there, half, not quite half there, but you're kind of dancing around.
I was down there last spring. Wait, what part of the year is it? Okay. No, in February, I actually went down for something, and it was on a day that the passes were closed. And I was like, so half of the state is actually cut off from the state capitol during the session. That seems a little backwards. I wonder how we're going to deal with that in the future. And then, of course, everything shuts down and moves on to Zoom. So answered that question at least. But there is that one representative who is talking about how they covered 100,000 miles or something by car throughout Eastern Washington in order to visit all the different community groups that they had to go to.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect most representatives from Eastern Washington to be carless, it's true. But it does seem like probably an underrepresented perspective in the representatives, and certainly having experience being homeless, I'm sure is very underrepresented.
Yeah, it's I think that's one cool thing about some of the newer candidates. We endorsed Twin and Nobles in it's the 28th, I think, in near Tacoma, and she has also experienced homelessness, and brings that experience and a wealth of other experiences, and is one of the reasons why not only do we endorse her in that race, but we're super excited about having her represent us in Olympia, especially when the alternative is Steve O'Ban, who is just terrible. He's obsessed with trying to dismantle Sound Transit and just a general kind of curmudgeonly conservative dude. So yeah, it seems like there's a lot of people who are running for office who just traditionally just like either didn't have the chance to or didn't get traction when they did. So we're glad to have a lot more of a wide variety of candidates, not just the typical, upper middle class type folks running. Okay, got an update. It was an issue of Sherae's phone dying. So they are getting it plugged in and should be able to hop back on in soon. I figured it was either that or losing Wi-Fi, which this seems like the more solvable problem, short of Comcast miracle. But so yeah, we'll should have Sherae again in a minute here. Yeah, the streaming can totally kill your battery.
While simultaneously hiding your battery level.
Yeah. Yeah, for real, being a candidate is not easy. I've never been a candidate, but I've worked in politics, and yeah. I'm sure you're on calls all day, and did find the time to meet your own needs, let alone your phone's needs. It's tough.
The phone battery level is an allegory. but just echoing Sherae's last observation about throwing money after bad, just like clockwork, there's a whole bunch of tweets. Well, no, it's one tweet about 50 jobs going from Seattle to Tacoma or Tucson, sorry, 50 jobs going to Tucson, and how it's terrible that this business is being swiped from Seattle because of our politics.
Yeah, they always blame it on politics.
Who was
Right.
it that said that most relocations of factories are within 50 miles of the CEO's house?
I don't remember if that sounds plausible.
Because I think Boeing got taken over by somebody who had a house in Chicago.
Yeah, and it's how often do you hear a business that closes and they go, well, we failed because I didn't have a very good business model and I made some mistakes and had some bad luck. It's always, oh, the local politicians did it.
I think there was an Onion article one time where it was like Intel closes up shop because they were done.
Hello.
Hey,
Sorry.
that's okay. We understand how that goes.
Have you ever been on the phone with CenturyLink for 2 days?
Oh, CenturyLink. I was making Comcast jokes, so I had it half right. But
You know what you would think, and that's why I switched to CenturyLink. And this is a great segue to municipal broadband.
totally. Yeah, Ray was making that leap too. I think a lot of us are going there. Yeah, that would be amazing. I feel like we all pay far too much for pretty mediocre service, and these companies on top of that are pretty greasy. Yeah. Some people in the chat saying they've been having similar issues.
Yeah, and that's what they say. They won't even tell us the specifics. And they like keep alluding to it being about non-payment, even though it's not. And that's rude. Like, maybe I don't have $100 right now. But also, why'd you shut me off early?
Totally.
The runaround's been interesting. But also we have a bustling campaign going in need of Wi-Fi, as well as like a bunch of other projects that are direly in need of it. That's why my phone died, is because I'm straight up using my phone for this instead of my computer because reasons.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense now because you can't count on the Wi-Fi. So then it's cascading errors on the leading all the way back to CenturyLink. Well, I don't remember exactly where we were. Oh,
about defunding cops.
Defunding cops. Yeah, we can't.
How to explain that to our friends and family members that might not quite understand why it's not as scary as it sounds, and it's actually going to help all of us, including them. So yeah, I would say, I started with that, but so I think I literally dropped on why would we give money and more power to folks who haven't even gotten their issues under control with their violence and murder of community members. It's just like, and this should be the easiest analogy for everyone. Do you deserve $100,000 a year raise after you've lost your company, essentially the entire product line? Because if what the police are supposed to do is ensure the safety and security and health and safety of everyone in the community, and they take a life, why would we give them a raise?
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of people in SPD get promoted after misconduct or violence, and yeah, it's been pretty remarkable just how much people can keep climbing and how the department keep getting more money with the kind of results they get. So yeah, totally. We have a couple more questions, and I suppose we should let you go at 7:30. Is that the plan?
I want to respect y'all's time as well. So if you want to keep me for a little bit and give people space to depart quietly, you could do that, and I could stay for an extra 10.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's totally up to you. If you have the time, we can keep going for the extra 10. We'll see how many questions we get to. But thank you for that. And let me see. Oh, here's a good question. This one's from Scott. Transportation is one of the biggest budget items you will be voting on. Where do you stand on funding new highways and expansions versus shifting funding to maintenance, seismic retrofits, transit, and environmental projects like fixing roadway fish barriers, which kind of relates to salmon runs?
I am very much of the mindset of no new highways until everything we have now has been taken care of. I don't really see it as an issue to get around the state. If you're going, to another major hub, we have pretty decent roads, and we should be maintaining them and making them safer versus creating anything new or expanding the number of lanes. So first and foremost, if we have money going into any new highways that aren't already paved, that should be something that we should take a look at and probably not go with, and then reinvest that money directly into the infrastructure that we need to continue life as we have it right now, and also work on making people less car dependent by making roadways that are actually, more bike friendly, more pedestrian friendly, and investing in actual transit.
Awesome. Yeah, we love it when legislators take the no new highways sort of pledge there. So that's awesome to hear. And I can't help myself because we've been following this, and that's definitely not the direction that some of the state leaders are going. I'm thinking of Senate Transportation Chair Steve Hobbs actually had a proposal they kicked around to do a small carbon tax to fund new highway projects. How do you feel about that kind of pairing? Does it like cancel out, like, is that like some sort of balancing out an evil with a good or something?
No, it's not even balancing anything out. All it's doing is trying to make up for the decision that they're trying to make that actually exacerbates the issue we're currently in. If we do a carbon tax, it needs to go directly into affordable transit or free transit, or into infrastructure we already have in dense areas to make it less car dependent. If we spend a carbon tax on more places for you to drive your car, it's a wash. At best. We don't even talk about, as much as we probably should, how damaging it is to our environment and our air and our waterways to produce asphalt, to produce concrete. We probably should start talking about that. It's not just making more places for cars to go to pollute. It's about how much it hurts our environment and our health to produce the materials to make the roadways for the vehicles. Why don't we talk about that more? Do you know?
I guess car culture runs deep. That's always my answer. I guess when I kind of have to shrug my shoulders. And the other one I think of is I know that there is a part of your platform that's related to Indigenous and treaty rights, and that always makes me think of all these roads we've created that often, and with the dams, have been pretty bad for a lot of our salmon runs. And some of those are, depends how you interpret a treaty, but some of those are protected fishing runs. So that's another one where it's sort of like we've overlooked conveniently those kind of obligations. And if you'd like to expand on sort of your plank about Indigenous and treaty rights, I'd be curious about that.
So, just like I say in pretty much every facet of my platform, I'm not the authority on everything. Pretty much only the authority on my own experience and how hard it's been to survive under the systems we have now. But there are authorities in almost every, facet of what we govern. And it's a pretty stark contrast between how we run our state legislator and governing bodies versus what our indigenous nations have, been fighting for. And they're fighting for the protection of the land as it to have be as close to what it was before we colonized it. Just looking at those priorities and knowing that they were here before us, they are the authorities on what the environment here needs and what it should, be restored to as much as possible. It's also not a lot to ask to be respected and have the land respected that we are living on. So specifics are not mine to give, just like other people's experiences, but I would know that in any situation that had to do with the environment and restoring damage we have done on stolen land, I would be deferring to the indigenous nations that have been fighting every single day to protect it from being damaged further and being eradicated, especially, the salmon that have thrived here, that have spawned here, and that are being killed off systematically.
Awesome, thank you. I also am curious. Let's see, did I get to everything? Oh yeah, we had a question about this one's getting a little wonky. Sorry about that, but this is something that definitely, I think will come up because it's due for renewal. So it's the multifamily tax exemption, which if folks aren't familiar, it's 12. It can be up to 12 years that a developer can get a property tax exemption if they produce some affordable housing on site. So as long as they're creating that housing, they get the tax credit, and it's been used often for like 80% of area median income housing. So not super low income housing, but it's producing housing, and obviously when we have a shortage, so that's the argument for it. But the argument against it is that it hasn't necessarily been shown, at least according to a recent JLARC study, which is like the sort of independent research arm in Olympia of government, to actually increase housing production. So that's one of the arguments for it, is that you both get affordable housing and increase production. Everyone's happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you kind of untie that knot? Is there a way to make MFTE better? Would you just keep it going, well, at least it's some production, or how do we kind of go forward from here?
I'm over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're told all the time, like, if we do this thing for the people that have everything, maybe they'll help us out too. And that's how we get essentially duped into allowing these things to pass, where we keep giving these breaks to the people that already have everything. And we say, well, because they have the power, we have to do it on their terms in order to get what we need as, the bottom half of the economic rungs, the ladder. And I'm so over it. But what I will say is, the reason it hasn't actually, in my opinion, led to more production of affordable housing is because it does not behoove them to actually create enough affordable housing that it's not still commodified, that it's not still the highest possible value for other units that may not be under the NFTA. So I think 12 years is far too long if I had it my way and I was the only one in charge. Personally, was never able to get into any of those because I either was barely too high or way too low to even be able to afford the unit. I don't think there should be a 12-year break at all. We tried it, it didn't work. We shouldn't be, conceding to the whims and essentially bullying of developers. And one of the ways to do that is to actually start investing in our own public housing and our own development. But yeah, we really need to stop making tax breaks for people that already have so many resources in the hopes that they are going to give back, because it hasn't worked so far. And if we keep doing that, going down that road, we're going to end up with a lot of people dying because they didn't get the return. And oddly enough, I remember in a forum a couple of weeks ago, someone asked my opponent why he has so much property in the Central District. And his response was that he plans to retire there and create some affordable housing that's accessible by the folks that live in the Central District. And I don't know why that leads me right back to this question, but that's the first thing that came into my mind when you brought it up, is a lot of folks with a lot of power have been using that as an excuse to, buy up land that would not necessarily go into the hands of large developers in historically Black neighborhoods, displacing dozens of people and only giving a couple of units back. And that's the one-for-one MAH or MHA, like that stuff. It's just not enough. We need to be incentivizing folks that put in a lot more than the bare minimum, not people that do the bare minimum just to line their pockets further.
And I'm curious about models you think that work better, because you're a big advocate for participatory budgeting, and sort of really robust community, engagement in meaningful ways. Is Africa Town sort of a model that you look to, or what do you kind of look as like, okay, they're doing it right?
I mean, they're doing it better than a lot of community organizations, but I will say that they've had a lot of struggles in getting the financing they need or getting the development partners to get projects off the ground as quickly as they can conceptualize them. And part of that, I feel like, has to do a lot with banking practices, and has to do with the fact that we make it so comfortable for developers in the city and the state to develop in a predatory manner. I don't think we should be making it so comfortable that they turn down an opportunity to work with community to build affordable housing. I think they're on the right the right path. I think that Queer the Land is also on the right path when it comes to like community land trusts. But I also think that the state itself owns so much property. And we talk about, union jobs to maintain our infrastructure and do maintenance on our highways and, keep our city running. But we don't talk about how we could also invest quite literally in partnerships with community developers and start building public housing and affordable housing on the land that we already have. And I don't know why we haven't gone that way when it's been an opportunity and a need for so long.
That is a great note to kind of wrap up on. It's sheraeforstate.com, right? Is that right?
Oh my God. Yes, it's sheraeforstate.com and at Sherae for State on all social media.
Yeah, on social media. I encourage folks, how can they help the campaign? Is it phone bank, text bank, or what is a good way to get involved?
Okay, interestingly enough, knock your block. That's our thing right now. We're also doing phone banking on Fridays with Sunrise. They're hosting that. We're doing canvassing every weekend where we drop literature and care supplies. But we really want to directly communicate with people in the district on how they think we can reach their neighbors more than anything. We don't have a one size fits all for everyone in the district. So we're taking suggestions as well about where we should be focusing. But if you want to phone bank with Sunrise or canvas with DSA and Sunrise and Washington Climate Strike this weekend, they're doing that. And donate if you can. Everything helps. Got a big staff and a lot of things to apparently buy to get the word out and my name out there, and I would really appreciate any donations.
Of course. Thanks so much for your time. We will share the video for folks who want to, if you know anyone who needs a little last minute persuasion, voter persuasion. It's going to be a close race, and every vote counts. And I also wanted to plug that we have definitely do events with Sherae. We also have an event with Yes for Transit to get more money for Keep Our Transit Service, Keep Our ORCA Opportunity Program, which provides fare free transit to public school students, high school students in our city, and to SHA residents. So we need to renew that tax to keep paying for this wonderful transit. That's Prop 1, Yes for Transit. And the phone bank is on Thursday. If you'd like to join us in the Yes for Transit campaign at 5:30, check our website for details. Become a subscriber, donate to us and donate to Sherae if you have the resources. If you have time to resources, definitely check out those events. And thanks again. We're rooting for you, Sherae, and thanks for running such a great campaign.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the endorsement. Thank you for all your efforts on keeping, Seattle accessible. I really appreciate it. And if you can, vote, even if it's not for me.
Thank you. And best of luck on the campaign trail. Keep that phone charged. We understand it's not an easy task.
Okay, more batteries. Got it. I will invest. Thank you. Have a good night.
Take care.